My mother, Eleanor, is a woman who has lived her life in soft colors. Her world is a palette of beige, gentle gray, and faded floral patterns. Since my father's death 10 years ago, her life has been a quiet, predictable rhythm of gardening, book club meetings, and her weekly bridge game. She is a woman of simple tastes and frugal habits, the kind of person who reuses tea bags and saves wrapping paper. That's why, when I took over managing her finances a few years ago, I expected it to be a simple, boring task. And for a long time it was. I'd sit at my kitchen table once a month, her neat stack of bills and bank statements beside me, and pay the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes. It was a comforting ritual, a way of caring for the woman who had spent her entire life caring for me. Her expenses were as predictable as she was. The grocery store, the pharmacy, the local garden center. There were never any surprises. Until there were. It started small. A $200 cash withdrawal from an ATM in a town 3 hours away. I noticed it, but dismissed it. She'd probably taken a day trip with her bridge friends, I thought. A little adventure she'd forgotten to mention. But the next month, there was another one, from a different town, this time for $300. And the month after that, another. They were always cash withdrawals, always from small, out-of-the-way towns in the neighboring state. When I asked her about it, her response was a masterpiece of vague deflection. "Oh, that?" she said, not looking up from her knitting. "Just helping out an old friend. You know how it is." I didn't press. My mother is a private woman. I assumed it was one of her friends before she met my father, someone who had fallen on hard times. My mother, in her quiet way, was a deeply kind person. But the withdrawals began to escalate. They became more frequent, and the amounts grew larger. $500, $1,000. They were no longer random day trips. They were a pattern, a significant, steady drain on her modest retirement savings. My concern shifted from curiosity to a gnawing anxiety. Was she being scammed? Was some predatory old friend taking advantage of her good nature? I tried to talk to her again, this time more directly. "Mom," I said, laying a bank statement on her perfectly tidy coffee table. "This is a lot of money. Can you please tell me who you're giving it to? I'm worried about you." She looked at the statement, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes I had never seen before. Fear. It was gone in an instant, replaced with a cool, uncharacteristic firmness. "It's my money, dear, and it's a private matter. Please, don't ask me about it again." She had never spoken to me like that before. The wall she put up was so sudden, so absolute that it stunned me into silence. But it also confirmed my deepest fears. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She was not in control of the situation. I had to find out what was going on, not just to protect her finances, but to protect her. I knew that the ATM withdrawals were a dead end, but there were also a few electronic transfers, small ones, that had started recently. They were to a single, reoccurring name, M. Jennings. The memo line was always the same: support. I felt a pang of guilt, a feeling that I was crossing a line, but my worry for her was a more powerful force. I took the name, M. Jennings, and I did something I never thought I would do. I started to dig. My first search was a simple one, a social media lookup. I found a few people with that name, but nothing that seemed to connect to my elderly mother in any logical way. I felt a surge of frustration. I was chasing a ghost. I decided to try a different approach. My mother was a woman who lived her life in the past. Her stories, her memories, they were the most important things to her. On a whim, I typed her maiden name and the name Jennings into the search bar of a popular genealogy website my cousin had been using to map our family tree. I wasn't expecting to find anything. I thought maybe it was a distant relative, a forgotten branch of the family. The website whirred for a moment, and then a result appeared. It was a public record, a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Mark Jennings. My heart began to beat a little bit faster. I clicked on the record, and the mother's name was listed as Eleanor May Collins, my mother's full maiden name. The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, at the black and white letters that were methodically, systematically destroying the world as I knew it. The date of birth on the certificate was 2 years before my mother had married my father. 2 years before the life I had always known had supposedly begun. I clicked on the name Mark Jennings, and a family tree began to populate on the screen. It showed him married to a woman named Susan. It showed that they had 2 children, a boy and a girl. It showed their current city of residence, a small town in the neighboring state, the same state where all the ATM withdrawals had been made. I felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through my body. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't an old friend. This was a son. A secret son. My mother, my quiet, gentle, predictable mother, had a secret family, a whole other life, a whole other history that she had kept hidden for her entire life. My father, had he known? Did he go to his grave carrying this secret with him? The man I had called my father, the man whose picture sat on my mother's mantelpiece, was not her only love. I was not her only child. My entire life, my entire understanding of my family was a carefully curated lie. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger who had been sending money, her love, packaged in anonymous cash withdrawals, to a life I never knew she had. The ghost in our house wasn't a question of money, it was a question of everything, and I was standing in a graveyard of secrets with no idea how deep the graves were. For days, I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by the ghost of a brother I never knew. I would sit across from my mother at her kitchen table, watching her calmly sip her tea, and my mind would scream with 1,000 unasked questions. Who was this man? What was his story? Did I have his eyes? His smile? The urge to confront her, to lay the birth certificate on the table between us and demand an explanation was a physical ache. But every time I opened my mouth, the words would die in my throat. How do you ask a question that has the power to detonate a lifetime of secrets? Her lie was so vast, so all-encompassing, it was almost a work of art. It had been maintained for over 30 years. It had survived the birth of another child, a long marriage, the death of a husband. It was a fortress. And I, her own daughter, was on the outside, looking at the impenetrable walls. I became an obsessive, secret historian of my own family. The genealogy website was a rabbit hole, and I fell into it head first. I started building out the hidden branch of my family tree. Mark Jennings, he was my half-brother. He was 45 years old. He worked as a contractor. His wife, Susan, was a school teacher. Their children, my niece and nephew, were teenagers. I found their pictures online. A family photo from a local newspaper article about a school fundraiser. They were smiling, a happy, normal-looking family. And in the face of the man in the picture, my brother, I saw a faint, undeniable echo of my mother's jawline. The more I learned, the more the questions tormented me. Why had she kept him a secret? Was she forced to give him up for adoption? Did his father abandon her? The story of my mother's life, as she had told it to me, had always been simple. She met my father in college, they fell in love, they got married. There were no blank spaces in the timeline, no room for a secret baby. The withdrawals continued. Now that I knew their destination, they felt different. They were no longer a source of worry, but a source of a strange, bitter resentment. She was sending them my inheritance, the money my father had worked his entire life for. She was sending it to a family he may not have even known existed. The lie wasn't just an emotional one, it was a financial one. I knew I couldn't confront her without more information. I needed to understand the why. The secret was locked inside her, and she was the only one with the key. I had to find another way in. I started going through her old things, searching for a clue, a letter, a photograph, anything that could shed some light on the 2 missing years of her life.
I found my answer in the attic, in a dusty, forgotten trunk tucked away under the eaves. It was her old college trunk, filled with a jumble of memories she had packed away and never looked at again. Faded sorority paddles, old yearbooks, dried corsages, and at the very bottom, beneath a stack of old sweaters, was a small, leather-bound diary. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her handwriting was young, a looping, optimistic script. The early entries were a chronicle of a normal college girl's life. Classes, parties, a crush on a boy in her literature class, my father. Their love story was there, in her own words, just as she had always told it to me. But as I read on, the dates began to align with the timeline of the birth certificate, and the tone of the diary began to change. Her entries about my father became less frequent. A new name appeared. A professor. A married man. The entries became more secretive, filled with the thrill and the shame of a forbidden affair. And then the entry that made my blood run cold. 2 words, written in a shaky, terrified hand. I'm pregnant. I read on, my heart breaking for the young, scared girl my mother had been. The professor had panicked. He had threatened to ruin her, to have her expelled if she told anyone. He had abandoned her, completely and utterly. She was alone, pregnant, and facing the crushing social shame of the era. She had dropped out of college, telling everyone she was taking a semester off to care for a sick aunt. She had gone away to a home for unwed mothers, a place of hushed whispers and quiet judgment. The diary was a raw, uncensored record of her pain, her loneliness, her terror. She had given the baby up for adoption, believing it was the only way to give him a good life, a life free from the stain of her mistake. The adoption was closed. She was never supposed to see him again. She had returned to college the next year, a piece of her soul amputated. She had reconnected with my father, a kind, steady man who knew nothing of her secret. They had built a life together, a good life, a happy life, a life built on a foundation of silence. But the story didn't end there. A final entry dated 10 years after the first told the rest of the story. The adoption agency had contacted her. The boy's adoptive parents had been killed in a car accident. He was an orphan of the state. Did she want to be found? Did she want to be a part of his life? She had met him, a small, scared 10-year-old boy who had lost everything, and she had made a choice. She couldn't bring him home. How could she explain him to my father, to her friends, to the world? The lie was too big now, too entrenched. So she had made a secret pact. She had found a distant cousin willing to take him in, and she had agreed to support him, secretly, for the rest of his life. It wasn't a story of betrayal. It was a story of tragedy. A story of a desperate, lifelong penance. The money wasn't a gift. It was an obligation, a secret tax on a secret shame. My mother wasn't a liar. She was a prisoner of her own past, still paying the price for a mistake she had made as a scared, lonely girl. The knowledge changed everything. The anger and resentment I had felt dissolved, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of compassion. I was not the only one who had been haunted by a ghost. She had been living with 2 of them, the ghost of the son she had given away and the ghost of the secret she could never tell. I knew then that a confrontation wasn't the answer. An accusation would be an act of cruelty, a judgment on a lifetime of impossible choices. But the silence couldn't continue. The secret was a poison, slowly draining the life from her, and now from me. I had to find a way to let the light in, not with a harsh, interrogating glare, but with a gentle, healing dawn. I decided to start with my own truth. I went back to the genealogy website, and I did something I had been too scared to do before. I clicked the button that said, "Send a message." I wrote a short, simple note to the man whose picture I had stared at for hours. My brother. "My name is Clara," I wrote. "I believe Eleanor may be my mother as well. I don't know the whole story, but I would very much like to." I hit send, my heart pounding, having no idea what, if anything, would come back.
The reply came 2 days later. My phone buzzed with a notification from the website, and my heart leapt into my throat. The message was short, cautious, but undeniably there. "I don't know what you've been told," he wrote, "but Eleanor is the woman who gave birth to me. That's all I've ever really known. I'd be willing to talk." His name was Mark. We started with emails, then graduated to phone calls. The conversations were hesitant at first. Two strangers trying to assemble a shared puzzle from a handful of mismatched pieces. He told me his side of the story. He remembered being a happy, loved child, and then the sudden, violent rupture of his parents' death. He remembered the cold, impersonal world of the foster care system, and then he remembered Eleanor, a sad, beautiful woman who would visit him, who brought him gifts, who told him she was a friend of his mother's. He remembered being sent to live with a woman he was told was a distant aunt, and the checks that would arrive every month like clockwork. As he got older, he had pieced together the truth. The aunt had finally admitted who Eleanor was, but he had never pushed it. He had never demanded more from her than she was willing to give. "I figured she had her reasons," he said, his voice heavy with a lifetime of resignation. "I had a roof over my head. I had a life. It was better than what a lot of kids get. The money, I took it because she offered it. I have a family of my own now. A mortgage. It helped, but I never felt good about it. It always felt like hush money." He was not the predator I had feared. He was a man who had been dealt a difficult hand and had simply played the cards he was given. He had never known about me. The knowledge that Eleanor had built a new life, a happy life, with another child was a quiet, painful revelation for him. Our conversations became a strange kind of therapy. We were two halves of a secret finally coming together to make a whole. The more we talked, the more I knew what I had to do. The secret couldn't just be mine and his, it had to be hers too. She deserved to be free from the prison of her past. The plan was simple, and it was terrifying. I invited Mark and his family to my city for a weekend. I told him I wanted to meet my niece and nephew. I told him I wanted him to meet our mother. He was hesitant, scared of the emotional fallout, but I convinced him it was time. The silence had gone on long enough. I told my mother I had a surprise for her. I told her some old friends were coming to town, and I was hosting a dinner at my house. She was delighted. The day of the dinner, I was a nervous wreck. Mark and his family arrived first. Meeting him in person was surreal. He had my mother's eyes. His children, my niece and nephew, were shy and polite. We were a family of strangers, connected by a secret that was about to be told. When my mother arrived, she walked into my living room, her face wreathed in a happy, unsuspecting smile. She saw Mark standing there, and she froze. The color drained from her face. Time seemed to stop. She stared at him, and in her eyes, for the first time, they were not the eyes of my quiet, gentle mother. They were the eyes of the scared, heartbroken girl from the diary. "Eleanor," Mark said, his voice soft. She didn't say anything. She just looked from his face to mine, and in her eyes I saw a dawning, horrified understanding. She knew I knew. The fortress she had spent a lifetime building had finally been breached. I thought she would run. I thought she would cry. I thought she would deny it. But she did none of those things. She just stood there for a long moment, and then she took a deep, shuddering breath, a breath that seemed to release 50 years of pent-up silence. She walked over to Mark, and she put a trembling hand on his cheek. "You've grown up," she whispered, her voice thick with a lifetime of unshed tears. That night, for the first time, the story was told. All of it. The affair, the pregnancy, the adoption, the secret pact. She spoke, and we listened. The ghosts that had haunted our family for so long were finally brought out into the light. There were tears.
There was anger. There was 50 years of pain and regret laid bare on my living room floor. But there was also something else, a strange, fragile, and profoundly beautiful sense of relief. The secret had been a cancer, and it had finally been cut out. The healing could begin. It has not been easy. It is a messy, complicated, and often painful process of trying to weave two separate families, two separate histories, into a new, shared reality. My mother and Mark are slowly, awkwardly, getting to know each other. Two strangers who share the most profound of bonds. My niece and nephew are getting used to the idea of a new aunt, and I am getting used to the idea of a brother. The financial support has stopped. Mark insisted on it. He is a proud man, and he no longer wants to be a financial obligation. He and my mother are building a new relationship, one based not on money and shame, but on a tentative, fragile hope for the future. My mother is a different woman now. The secret had been a weight that had bent her into a shape that was not her own. Now she's lighter. The soft, faded colors of her life are slowly being replaced by brighter, bolder hues. She is no longer just a woman of quiet habits. She is a woman with a complex, painful, and ultimately a resilient past. I still manage her finances. But now, when I look at the statements, there are no more secrets, no more mysterious withdrawals. There are just the small, ordinary expenses of a woman who is finally, after a lifetime of hiding, free to be whole. The lie almost broke us, but in the end, the truth, in all its messy, painful glory, is what finally, miraculously, brought us all together.